So unexpectedly, Tucker Carlson went on Israeli TV yesterday, Channel 13. And I got to tell you, I mean, we got to give it up for Tucker. He spoke the truth. He did so boldly. And I just know Israeli TV instantly regrets having him on. Let's take a look at a few clips and you'll see exactly what I'm referring to. Let's dive in.
Iran terror regime that controls now also the Hormuz pathway and the terror ring that it created in the Middle East, maybe it would be even worse for any citizens in the world, not only in Israel, but also in the United States. And this is exactly what Donald Trump said. He said that the United States would have been in danger. So you don't believe Donald Trump?
I don't believe Donald Trump, and I also think as an Israeli, you should pause before using the phrase terror regime, since you live in a country that just murdered thousands of children in Gaza. We should all pull back a little bit.
He really said that. This isn't AI. That actually happened on Israeli TV, and I'm so glad it happened. Well done, Tucker. And by the way, that isn't the only incredible clip. I mean, there's a lot more. It's about a 13-minute interview from what I saw. We're going to take a look at a few more clips, but that one immediately caught my attention because, of course, that's what I'm often thinking, and I'm sure you are as well. Most people are. Whenever we hear Israel talking about Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah as terrorists, we're all just scratching our head thinking, excuse me, you're a terrorist state. What are you talking about? So you have no room to speak. In fact, that interviewer asks him about October 7th and, well, what about October 7th? And wait, hold on. What did you do to these people before October 7th? And what did you do to these people after October 7th? You want to focus on what happened on October 7th, but not everything that you did for decades before then and what you've done after then. If Hamas is bad, Israel is 1,000 times worse. So you have no room to speak. And he's pointing that out gently at times in the interview and at other points, maybe a little bit more bluntly. Let's take a look at this clip.
And of course, Israel's not a democracy in any sense. There are millions of people who live under Israeli control who cannot vote, right? And so if the West Bank, Judea and Samaria and Gaza, or whatever we're calling these places, which Israel has controlled since 1967, have people living in them who have no control over the government that controls their lives, which is true. It's not a democracy. So let's just drop the talking points. I agree with you on self-defense. I don't think killing children is self-defense. It never will be. And no amount of recounting the legitimate atrocities of October 7th will ever get me to accept this behavior from the Israeli government, from the U.S. government, from the Iranian government, or any government. It's always wrong. And Israel doesn't like to acknowledge the existence of universal principles that apply to everyone equally. That's why they're principles, not preferences. And Israel, again, which I've always liked as a country, is a lot of civilized, decent people living there to this day, has to acknowledge that principles are universal. They apply to everyone.
Exactly. Israel wants to have their cake and eat it too. They want to condemn terrorism while engaging in terrorism. And by the way, they see everyone who is their opponent as a terrorist, and therefore it allows them in their mind to justify the things that they do because they've indoctrinated themselves to say that everyone that they murder is a terrorist and therefore it's justified, including babies. It's an absolutely demonic mentality, but it's undeniable that that is the perspective of many, many Israelis in the government and citizens. It's pretty common, actually, which is terrifying. So glad to see him tackle that there. Take a look also at this clip.
Well, let me tell you what I do think, which is I don't want Israel to be destroyed. I don't want any Israeli to be harmed. I personally have always liked Israel. Not that that's relevant, but I have. So it's not, I don't want anyone to be hurt in Israel. I just don't understand why the United States has an obligation to pay for any of this, to send the weapons for it, to lend its moral authority to Israel, to lend its diplomatic cover to Israel, to lend its air force and its navy and its military to Israel. I don't understand, where does this obligation come from? And no one will answer that question. And instead they say, well, you're an anti-Semite. Well, I'm not an anti-Semite.
All right.
And that's not an answer. What is the answer? And I've never received one. And I know now, because of this war, that America's relationship with Israel, while it may be based on good intentions, is hurting the United States very badly, very badly. We can't afford it. And our standing in the world has declined, and we're implicated in some of the many crimes Israel has committed. Why?
I have some thoughts about it.
Now, he started that clip out with, he doesn't want Israel to be destroyed. And I understand where he's coming from. He doesn't want to see civilians, innocent civilians in Israel, being destroyed. I get that. And that makes sense. And that's consistent with the criticism of Israel that he's making, and that is that they're targeting civilians, and therefore they're in the wrong and engaging in terrorism. So on that point, he's consistent. But I think there's something that's being assumed here, right? That Israel as a state, I'm not talking about the people, has a right to exist. I think all Israelis, people, unless they're actually engaging in terrorism, at that point, I think they should be brought to justice. But the actual civilians who are not engaging in this kind of stuff, they have a right to exist. They're citizens just like, us here in the United States. And so, of course, they have a right to exist. Does the state, however, does the government, however, have a right to exist? I think that this question gets off on the wrong foot, because we have to ask, how was Israel established? Israel was established by ethnically cleansing 700,000 Palestinians from their homes and creating this illegal fake state by fiat and by immorality and also terrorism. And so you have to ask instead, not does the state of Israel have a right to exist? You have to ask, hold on, wait, I thought those Palestinians have a right to their homes. They have a right to return, according to the UN, which Israel continues to block, which is why I don't like people entertaining this question, does Israel have a right to exist? Before we can have that conversation, we need to have a conversation. Do those Palestinians have a right to return? And does Israel have a right to cleanse people from their home, ethnically cleanse people, kick them out, steal land, and genocide people? Do they have a right to do that? No, they don't. So if Israel as a government, if their existence depends on war crimes, then no, they don't have that right. Now, if there's nobody on that land, yeah, sure, go ahead. Create your state all you want. I don't care. But you don't get to create a state on the land and property of other people at their expense. You don't get to do that. Not at all. And I think that needs to be pointed out. And I really wish that Tucker had addressed it, but I like overall what he's doing here. Now take a look at this clip.
Foreign leader can pull the president of the United States into a war he didn't want. And what does it tell us about Trump? Is he really that weak?
Well, I don't think that could happen. I saw it happen. I was there. And so that happened. So the question is why? And I just want to be clear, I don't primarily blame the Israeli prime minister, who I think is wrong. I think he's gravely hurt Israel. I think he's leading Israel toward destruction. I think he's a very bad leader and a very unwise leader. However, I also believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is acting in what he thinks is his nation's best interest. So I give him credit for that and always have. I don't blame him primarily. I blame Donald Trump for folding under the pressure from Benjamin Netanyahu and his many allies in the United States. Donors to Donald Trump, people in the media class here, were effectively working on behalf of the Israeli government, and Donald Trump, whose decision it was, caved under that pressure. But on February 28th, the United States followed Israel into this war. And the Secretary of State of the United States said, we had no choice. They chose the time. The Israeli prime minister decided when this started. Well, that's the definition of control. He had control of this war. And so my question is, why did Donald Trump allow a nation of 9 million people to pull the United States, a nation of 350 million people, into a war that will change its future and that is bad for the United States? And I can't.
I wonder what the average Israeli citizen is thinking as they watch that clip. And I'll say, yeah, I understand where Tucker's coming from as far as he blames primarily Trump, not Bibi. Look, I blame them all. I blame Trump. I blame Bibi. I blame also Biden. Biden took a huge part and role in the genocide of the people of Gaza. We don't need to forget that. I blame all of them. Every bit of them. Everyone. Also, everyone in Congress that funded this and allowed for it. Now, take a look at this one.
Really labeled Israel as committing genocide? You said that.
Ethnic cleansing. Israel's trying to take the people who live there and move them out.
You said genocide. You said about Israelis,
genocide, killing,
about the people,
killing
the state of the Jews. You said we are committing genocide.
Israel has murdered all these children, thousands of children in Gaza. But the real criminal is me because I describe that as genocide. Okay, it's not it's killing innocents. It's wrong. You can call it genocide or ethnic cleansing.
So you're not calling
it
a
a crime, a sin, an atrocity. I don't really care. What I'm saying is murdering children is wrong. You're more upset by how I describe the murder of children than you are at the murder of children, which says a lot.
Well said, because that guy shows moral outrage over Tucker identifying this as genocide and less outrage over what Israel is doing when it engages in ethnic cleansing and genocide. And by the way, I don't like that Tucker was kind of backing away.
In what may be the most stunning political reversal of the decade, the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the same men who stood shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump just weeks ago, have quietly, desperately sent high-level delegations rushing toward Tehran, not to negotiate, not to broker peace, to beg. And Trump? Trump is panicking. While the American president was busy posting victory messages about his so-called Hormuz blockade, something happened that no Pentagon general and no Western news outlet wants you to fully understand. The blockade didn't just fail. It triggered the exact opposite of what it was designed to do. It drove America's own Gulf allies straight into the arms of Iran. So here is the question no one in Washington dares to ask out loud. Did Trump just accidentally hand Iran the biggest geopolitical win of the 21st century? Stay with me. Because what is unfolding right now in the Persian Gulf is not just a military story. It is a story about power, betrayal, desperation, and the slow and painful collapse of an American strategy that was broken before it even began. Let's start with what actually happened at the Strait of Hormuz. Because if you have only been watching Western cable news, you have been handed a version of this story so cleaned up and so far from reality that it might as well be a bedtime story written for Washington lobbyists. When Trump announced the naval blockade of Iran, the message from Washington was simple. The United States was going to choke Iran's oil exports, drain its economy, and force Tehran to the negotiating table within weeks. Clean? Surgical. Decisive. That was the plan. And on paper, if you completely ignore geography, history, economics, and the basic concept of how Iran operates, it might have sounded almost logical, except none of it worked. Within the first 48 hours of the blockade going live, ship tracking data told a completely different story. Iranian oil terminals did not go dark. Iranian tankers did not stop loading. What analysts watching real-time maritime data actually saw looked more like rush hour traffic. Hundreds of vessels moving oil out of Iranian ports with barely a pause. Iranian crude in enormous volumes kept flowing east. Straight toward China, the U.S. Navy, with its carrier strike groups and its destroyer patrols, watched. And did nothing. Because doing something, actually stopping a Chinese-linked tanker or intercepting a vessel flying another nation's flag, would have consequences that nobody in Washington was prepared to face. That is not a blockade. That is a photo opportunity with warships. And here is where this story shifts from embarrassing for America to genuinely alarming for every single Gulf state that signed up for this adventure. If you already understand how power moves in this region, you know that Iran's real weapon is not its navy. It is not its missiles. It is geography. And geography, unlike political will, cannot be sanctioned. Before we go deeper into what is happening with the Gulf leaders right now, because this part of the story is the part that mainstream media is completely burying, if this kind of reporting matters to you, hit the like button right now and drop a comment below. Even just the word watching tells the algorithm that this deserves to be seen. We do not answer to media corporations. We answer to you. Now let's talk about the Gulf leaders rushing toward Tehran and why this scramble represents the single biggest foreign policy failure in Gulf Cooperation Council history. For